Today marks World Refugee Day. It's observed across the globe to honour refugees. This year's theme is Hope Away from Home. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the number of refugees globally stood at 35.3 million by the end of 2022. That's about an increase of over 8 million in the previous year. For more on this, we're joined now by Dr Callixte Kavuro, a postdoctoral fellow in the law faculty at Stellenbosch University. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us this evening. As we mark World Refugee Day, I would like to take you back to an article from last year at the same time, in which you said that, and I quote, "We should also keep in mind that the issue of a high number of undesirable foreign nationals hinges on the inability of the state to implement effectively the rules and principles of immigration law on the one hand and refugee law on the other hand." That's a year ago. Has anything changed since last year in government's ability to effectively implement these laws?
Good evening and good evening to viewers. Yes, indeed, there has been some changes that have been made in terms of the implementation of Refugees Act, because the government has started to look at rights of refugees and to see how they can harmonize the refugee rights with the socio-economic rights which refugees and asylum seekers are entitled to. As I indicated in my articles last year, there was issues which has been persisting since the adoption of the Refugees Act in 1998 up to now. There have been some amendments to the Refugees Act, which, if I can put it plainly, is that in 2008, there have been amendments where asylum seekers were allowed to have access to rights which that apply to everyone. But the progress is very slow because there's a lack of harmonizing the Refugees Act or differentiating between the Refugees Act and the Immigration Act when you are applying it to foreign nationals. So sometimes there's what I can say inability to differentiate between the rights of migrants, in particular economic migrants, and asylum seekers on the other hand. So there's a need for harmonizing the rights to recognize them and recognize them under legislation that gives the effect to the constitutional rights, especially the socio-economic rights, such as the legislation that gives the effect to education, to social assistance, to emergency health care or primary health care, to the housing, to social security. Because when you look at, for example, there's socio-economic rights are very broad. For example, when it comes to socio-economic rights, to social security. Social security, for example, it will go further to cover things like pension, things like unemployment insurance fund, like road accident fund, like compensation for occupation injuries, like other privileges that is given in terms of labor, for example. When you look at all of these issues are not well regulated to give effect and to give meaning to in terms of refugees legislation. Yeah.
So just looking again at the situation in Diep Sloot this evening, where communities are fed up with non-existent policing and where they say, and I'm quoting again, that it's a fact that the majority of crime is committed by illegal foreigners in their community. Now, one can understand their frustration, and one must recognize that there are in fact criminal elements using South Africa's porous borders as easy access to vulnerable communities where they know they simply won't be caught. But in contrast, refugees and asylum seekers who try to enter the country on legitimate grounds have a much tougher time of it, just from your description of the inability to differentiate the legislation to make sure that refugees and asylum seekers, that their rights are protected under the Constitution. What is some of the biggest obstacles they face?
To start with, to come in the Republic through without a proper means like a passport or to cross the border into South Africa, it's in terms of refugee law, it's not a crime. That must be understood, so that whether it's unlawful entry or lawful entry, when it comes to refugees, that issue of illegality does not count. It does not count because when refugees leave their own countries, they're not prepared for the journey. That is why we call it a disparate journey, where they live and they are forced to leave or compelled to leave their home unplanned. And when they flee their countries, they don't need to go crossing the borders in a proper way. So that the refugees, or in terms of international refugee law, they are excluded from meeting immigration requirements. That is why we have the special law that regulates the refugees and asylum seekers, and we have that legislation in South African context, where we have the Refugees Act. So the Refugees Act works to exempt refugees and asylum seekers from certain conditions that they cannot meet if they wanted to enter or work or study in the host country. So when you refer to crimes in that context, you generalize, you speaking in general terms, that foreign nationals, when you refer to say foreign nationals, when you refer to migrants comprises a number of categories of foreign nationals. And those may include refugees, they may include asylum seekers, they may include economic migrants, they may include irregular migrants, they may include diplomatic, those who come for diplomatic missions and the others. So when we talk about them, we need to differentiate, and we know the vulnerabilities of certain categories of the people. And the other thing, perhaps, if we go back and we look deep into this situation, we see that, for example, when an asylum seeker arrives in the country, for example, arrives in South Africa, you will find that there's no mechanism to assist. There's no humanitarian assistance which is established by the government in order to assist a person who comes in the country with nothing. So, for example, we find that asylum seekers are not allowed to have access to social assistance. If they are not allowed to have social assistance or any other humanitarian assistance, and sometimes it takes a time for them to be able to have a proper documentation. And in that context, you see the government encouraging the asylum seekers to engage in illegal activities in order to survive. When a person comes in a country as an asylum seeker, there's a standard principle that they must have access to humanitarian assistance. So the humanitarian assistance will include food, will include a shelter over the head. If you imagine, for example, a person comes with the children, 2 children, 4 children is a family, and they need to stay in the country. And they stay in the country without any humanitarian assistance, where they stay in a country without having a shelter over their head. Obviously, they will try to try any means necessary to survive. So in that context, if we wanted to prevent the crime committed sometimes with certain foreign nationals, we needed to take an approach where we needed to deliver humanitarian assistance to these vulnerable people.
Thank you so
That
much
is really
for speaking to us. It's such an important issue to recognise the rights of refugees and asylum seekers in South Africa and give them access to the necessary support so that criminality is not their only way out. Thank you very much to Dr Callixte Kavuro, a postdoctoral fellow in the law faculty at Stellenbosch University.